This meeting is being conducted with a virtual component. Anyone wishing to address the board may virtually join the meeting online at https://mountview.zoom. It's on the agenda, or by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering webinar ID 8104-7552-190. When the chair announces the item on which you wish to speak, click the raise hand feature in the Zoom or dial *9 on your phone. When the chair calls your name to provide public comment, if you are participating via phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Any emails received by 4:30 p.m. today were forwarded to the PSAB. Emails received after 4:30 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Ms. Ramberg, can you take roll, please?
Certainly. Chair Wang.
Present.
Vice Chair Tang.
Present.
Member Ayar.
Present.
Member Brodowski.
Present.
Member Frink.
Present.
Member Langton has an excused absence. Member Souter.
Present.
Roll taken. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. We're moving on to item 3, minutes approval. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the meeting minutes? Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I move to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
Awesome. Could you take a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Chair Wang.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tang.
Yes.
Member Ayar.
Yes.
Member Brodowski.
Yes.
Member Frink.
Yes.
And Member Souter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Item 4 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the advisory board on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the PSAB from acting on non-agendized items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on the agenda?
We have one request.
Okay, please click the raise hand feature, dial *9.
Sorry, keep going.
Oh, sorry. They can. I think
You
they're
can
the
go ahead and
only
call
ones.
them.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive, and a member of the Mountain View Coalition for Police Reform and Accountability, or MVCPRA. Just have one comment. I think it might be one that we've asked about before, but there's an infographic for mental health response calls that was provided related to county services. We're also hoping that it will include services related specifically to Mountain View Police Department and services, which we have discussed with Chief Canfield, so he's aware of this. Anyway, we would like that in its complete form to be posted in a place probably on the PSAB page where members of the public who are interested can refer to it. So that's just a comment from us. Also, the work plan, your current work plan, as far as we can tell, is not published on the website. We like to request that it be posted. And the subcommittees and their obligations aren't necessarily clearly named in the work plan, and the formal names are not necessarily in there. We'd like that to be clarified if they can be. Lastly, we have a question about work plan development. The work plan development is not in the work plan. So if that makes sense to you, and I'm not sure how you track that. It'd be interesting to know, like, if that's not in the work plan, is that something that staff keeps track of on behalf of PSAB, or how's that handled? We're wondering. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to?
Dana PD.
Sounds good.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking my comment. Dana Peedy, Mountain View resident, also a member of MVCPRA. I have a more follow-up question about the subcommittees specifically. Even as someone who's been following the work of this group pretty carefully, it's been very challenging to tell which subcommittees have ongoing work, which ones might be sort of on pause, but still exist in order to take up the work every so often. For example, I know we get annual updates about the SRO program. So maybe the committee is still active, but in a sort of passive way. It's just been very challenging to tell when subcommittee work is ongoing versus when it's been resolved. I also noticed that at the end of this agenda, we're talking about ad hoc committees, which I'm sure is a term that was intentionally chosen. And I'm curious about the thoughtfulness behind that. Just seeking some clarity. One idea we've suggested in the past has been just a line item update for, subcommittees, even if the answer is there's no work, but we still exist. There's no work, but we still exist, or we are ongoing. We haven't been able to meet, or whatever it is. Just because it's great, important work that y'all are doing. And I think that it'd be great for the public to be more aware of what's ongoing and what's been resolved. And I know that coincides with the work plan, like Bruce just mentioned, but specifically, if there's any way to put it on the website or in agenda somehow, it would be incredibly useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Another public comment. Awesome. Just to summarize what I was hearing, just adding some things to the website and then just updating on the status of subcommittees, but we won't do any work on that. I just wanted to summarize what I heard. Okay, we will now close oral communication item and move to the discussion and action items. To facilitate participation by all PSAP members, I'll be recognizing in turn each member to signal if they are ready to speak. After all members who wish to speak on an item have done so, I will recognize members who have additional comments. I think we're skipping agenda item 5.1.
Yes, the visitor that we were going to have to present to us an update on the trust program, which was Paula Giannoni from Momentum for Health, was unable to join us tonight. So we're going to reschedule this item for the December meeting, and it will be the director of the trust program for North County, Bindu Karana Brown, who will be here to give us that update.
So we'll move on to 5.2. Police Captain McKee will present the MVP back data.
Thank you, Chair. Wahid McKee, Police Captain, City of Mountain View. This presentation will cover the twice yearly report on MVPD performance and feedback data. There's an accompanying staff report for this meeting agenda as well.
Hand it at me.
Yep.
Sometimes it wants to go to sleep. Okay, try again. There you go.
All right, we're good to go. Let me provide a quick overview of this presentation. We'll be covering the background of this work item. We'll discuss the different types of feedback mechanisms and performance data that MVPD collects. We'll review the actual feedback and data for each mechanism, and then we'll discuss potential next steps. As the board recalls at your meeting on October 27th of last year, you received a presentation and were given staff report highlighting the different types of feedback mechanisms in place at MVPD and the programs that were under development. At the meeting, you approved to receive a twice annual report on several of MVPD's feedback mechanisms, which includes the RIPA data, which is the Racial and Identity Profiling Act data, MVPD personnel complaints, SRO complaints and feedback, MVPD social media platforms, feedback on MVPDX, and the My90, which is a customer service survey platform, as well as the informal chief advisory groups, Latino Community Advisory Committee, and the Faith Leaders Advisory Council. On January 26th of this year, the PSAP accepted the subcommittee and staff recommendations related to the collection and use of RIPA data. RIPA mandates the California law enforcement agencies collect data when a detention is made. For the purpose of RIPA, detention is when a person's stopped and they're not free to leave, as well as a consensual contact where a search is conducted. The RIPA data fields are required to be filled out, which includes date, time, duration of stop, and the location of stop, the perceived age, race, gender, and perceived LGBT status of the person stopped, whether the person stopped has limited or no English fluency, the perceived known disability of the person, the reason for the stop, whether the stop was in response to a call for service, and what actions were taken by the officer during that stop. In addition to collecting all the required data, MVPD collects additional information related to the contact, which includes if the person may have had a perceived mental health challenge, and what point during that contact did the officer perceive the subject's race or gender. Consistent with your staff recommendations, this presentation is accompanying the recommendations in this presentation are accompanying in the staff report that contains quarter 1 and 2 of this year's data. Additionally, the department is working on how best to create an interactive and mobile RIPA data platform that could be easily accessible to the public, and as well as the continued stop data analysis that was previously conducted by PhD research fellow Stevenson. So we'll go through some of the information. As outlined in the chart, 203 of the RIPA contacts, which is roughly 9%, were for calls for service. The rest were proactive stops conducted by the officer.
What stops?
Proactive contacts. So,
Correct.
I thought he said practice too.
Yeah.
sorry, let me get some. RIPA data was able to provide ethnicity and what was perceived by the officer, with the largest two groups being Hispanic Latino at 44% and white being 22%. From the RIPA data, 1,598 of the contacts, which is roughly 74%, were perceived to be male, and 2 subjects were perceived to be LGBTQ. From the RIPA data, a vast majority, which is roughly 90%, were not perceived to have limited English fluency, and a total of 5 people were perceived to have a disability. RIPA data also gathered reasons for detentions. Out of the total amount of detentions, 88% of the detentions were traffic stops, 8% were detentions based on reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, 34 consensual contacts, and these are under 1%. 34 of the consensual contacts were resulting in a search, 15 were known wanted persons, 13 of the stops were also known probationers or parolees where a compliance check was conducted, and 6 were truancy investigations, again, all falling under 1%. Out of our contacts, 92% of the subject's race was not perceived prior to the interaction, while 91% of the contacts of the subject's gender was not perceived prior to the interaction. From our contacts, officers perceived that 89% of their contacts involved subjects who they believed did not have mental health challenges, while 9% of the contacts the officers had, they were unsure if the person had or had not had any kind of mental health challenges. 2% were perceived as not having any challenge. As you recall, PSAB was receiving quarterly updates on data reporting. However, you determined that the PSAB meeting on October 27th of 22, the data will now be included in this twice yearly report. You're receiving data on the following categories on complaint data. If it's the origin, the sworn status, nature of the complaint, disposition of the investigation, and the level of the complaint. Of the 7 total complaints that occurred in Q3 and Q4 of 2022, again, of the 7 complaints MVPD received, 4 were found not sustained and 3 were pending. In Q1 and Q2, of this year, we've had 7 complaints, 4 are pending, 2 are unfounded, and 1 minor IA was sustained. Indicated in the SRO manual is a requirement that states the district and its administrators should provide a mechanism for students to provide feedback, make complaints, or document details of their interactions with SROs. Mountain View Los Altos High School has identified the principal or vice principal for both Mountain View High School and Alta Vista High School as administrative staff members who received the feedback about the SRO program. Currently, there's been no feedback or complaints provided from the district related to this requirement, although we're handling a complaint outside of this process related to an incident at Mistral Elementary School that was associated to the SRO program. Social media. Mountain View PD continuously strives to integrate social media and policing. This is done across numerous platforms and with our philosophy to create community connections, improve access, and strengthen transparency efforts. This is achieved through purposeful development of social media channels and long-term relationship building. Mountain View PD's approach is to provide transparency and insight into operations, culture, and important information such as criminal activity, road hazards, and other public safety concerns. Social media allows another way to have two-way communication about non-urgent items. Posts are shared in more personal tone designed to tell meaningful stories consistent with the culture of Mountain View Police Department. Our primary social media channels are Facebook, Instagram, X, which is formerly Twitter, and Nextdoor. These platforms will share a similar story. However, they do tend to have a different audience and have its own unique best fit. Public notice about significant cases are well suited for PD's Facebook page, and Nextdoor enables neighborhood-specific messaging, which can be valuable for looking for witnesses or victims or just getting messages to a specific area. Traffic-related posts regularly receive community comments about areas of traffic-related concerns. This feedback is passed along to the Mountain View Police Department Traffic Unit. This slide outlines our social media engagement across Facebook, Instagram, X, and Nextdoor. These are our largest followers, with our largest followers being on Facebook.
Can we go back and see that again?
Absolutely.
What do you mean by reach?
That's how many people have viewed it. So it can come across if it's shared or mainly if it's shared or there's some kind of hashtag that's posted that connects with other people that are looking for that kind of hashtag.
Okay, thank you.
MVPDX Partnering for the Future of Policing is a community-focused program that began in 2020 and recently completed its 5th cohort. The 8-week program consists of both experimental, scenario-based exercises and in-depth conversations about various themes and topics of policing. This program is designed to foster dialogue and has served as a valuable method for MVPD to receive feedback. Some of this feedback includes the need for greater targeted community engagement, offering perspectives on the SRO selection process, and concerns about bias-based calls to MVPD. MVPD acted on the feedback we received and implemented training and reaching out to neighborhood associations to have dialogue regarding calls for service and what should be called in and what maybe should not. MVPD will continue to host MVPDX cohorts and develop updated curriculum based on both important policing issues, but also the specific areas of interest of each cohort. Stemming from MVPDX feedback were 2 informal chief advisory groups created in 2021, the Faith Leaders Advisory Council. The participants include a range of leaders from different faith-based houses of worship in Mountain View. They share ideas about how PD can improve communication with congregations and the community about how communication can be shared and improved within the organization as well. The program has enabled better information sharing regarding resources for our community members and the unstably housed. Created in 2021, the LCAC is composed of both civic and faith-based leaders with the goal of ensuring strong communication between MVPD and Mountain View's Latino community-based members by creating access, information, and transparency to Mountain View PD.
I think we're a council as well, but.
What was that?
I think Latino Community Advisory is a council as well. That would be competitive with FLAC, but
In August of 2022, MVPD partnered up with My90. It's an anonymous customer survey platform Upon completion of the police department, incident survey link was sent to customers. These include victims of crimes, witnesses, and people that have made police reports, and it does not include people that received citations or were arrested. The feedback collected included the nature of the encounter, the level of satisfaction with the services they received, and how they were treated. In the report, they reported the race and gender of the community member, enabling the department to view potential differences in customer service and experience through that feedback. The survey also included open-ended questions where the community member provided comment. The vast majority of these comments were positive and highlighted MVP's professionalism and respectful approach. Currently, the My90 information is shared with the Mountain View Police Department's management team and is used to help gauge the quality of service the community is receiving, indicators of bias or perception of bias, also to evaluate the effectiveness of officers' communication. This information helps identify the strengths and areas for growth. MVPD has identified next steps for the My90 platform to potentially include direct access by officers, as well as a public-facing dashboard where community members can see the feedback. Of the My90 respondents, there was a slightly larger number of males that were contacted, and approximately 93% of our contacts were people 28 years of age or older. This slide depicts the race and ethnicity of people who are providing feedback, with roughly 55% of them being white, 25% Asian, and roughly 15% identifying as being Hispanic Latino. I guess, as you can see on the slide, when asked, how do you view the Mountain View Police Department, 88% viewed MVPD as either very positive or positive. 5% had a neutral view, 4% had a negative view, and 3% had a very negative view of Mountain View Police Department. The slide depicts the My90 community sentiment feedback, where on average, 92% of respondents felt that they were treated well by the Mountain View Police Department. Across all race, ethnicity groups, people in Mountain View had generally positive view of the Mountain View Police Department, as shown in the slide.
Could you see that
Absolutely.
again? To know how to read it.
So on the left,
First group is positive. And the next one is neutral and then negative and, okay.
correct from left to right, so very positively,
Are you-
positively, neutral, negatively, and very negatively,
So you're patting yourself on the back.
a little bit. Okay, good, John. Very good, John. When asked about community safety concerns, 41% felt that theft was their biggest concerns, followed by the quality of life concerns, noise, littering, followed by homelessness. Some did not have any concerns, and so on. Nearly half, which is 49% of respondents, felt that increasing patrol car visibility would increase safety in the community. And I would echo that as probably one of the main things I hear when I go to public events and neighborhood association meetings, is having patrol cars show more visibility, followed by increased community engagement, going to public events and neighborhood association meetings, I think would fall into that, and increased information sharing, which we do on social media or in person. Continuing the methodology designed by research fellow Stevenson to review our current stop data for indicators of bias. This will require selection of another external research fellow or similar position. MVPD staff is currently discussing with My90 development team for additional methods to utilize their platform for greater feedback, including potential integration with software for the Mountain View Police Department's professional standards unit, which uses a system to track officer uses of force and pursuit data. MVPD is also working on a My90 transparency page, as mentioned, where feedback will be available to the public. MVPD staff is currently working with vendors to create a public-facing use of force and RIPA dashboard. Data from this future dashboard and a link to the dashboard will be included in the future twice annual feedback report to the PSAB. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
If I may quickly, Captain McGee, Chair. As many, hopefully of you are aware, I sent an email to the board earlier today notifying you that the RIPA data that we had uploaded into Legistar with the staff report was in fact not actually manipulatable, although it was in a CSV format. It wasn't capable of doing what we wanted it to be able to do. Certainly what the board was expecting. That new data has been uploaded and is available to the board as well as to the public.
This is on Legistar again, or?
Correct.
Okay.
And upon request.
Thank you, Captain McKee, and thank you, Chief Canfield. Do board members have any questions before I open this item to public comment? Member Sadowski, that
She has the most.
I have a lot. Okay. So I think this was in one of the first slides, but I didn't catch it. Question is, what percentage of the stops lead to a ticket? When you stop people?
That could be processed through that link.
It wasn't on the slide?
It was not on the slide.
Can you give me an idea if it's like 10%, 50%, or 90%?
I would not want to guess. I would need to,
That's all right. I'll go on to the next question because
but I can get you that information.
Yeah.
I remember like they showed us a number, it was like 400, it wasn't that many. With respect to the stops.
Yeah, I had that idea and I
Yeah.
wondered if you had also an idea of the number of arrests that happened.
So if I may,
I thought that was-
Member Brodowski, that data is absolutely retrievable by the CSV, the Excel format that we've submitted. But offhand, we don't know. I may be able to, as we're working, pull it up and manipulate it and find some answers, but
But what you sent me was manipulative, right?
yes, it was.
Okay, I can do that. All right. When you stop people, are they usually scared?
I think there's various responses, especially if they've never been stopped by a police officer before. I think, as you can see from the feedback, at least from those that responded to My90, that it was a positive engagement. So at least at the end of that, if they were nervous, they hopefully left in a better mind frame than when they initially started.
My question really is your feeling as an officer who has done stops, that the person that you're stopping usually is afraid, or is your feeling that he's not afraid?
I would say there's a sense of being nervous. I think it's probably more revolved around what's going to happen regarding a ticket. But yes, I think at some level, there's some angst.
Okay. And again, your feeling about this, what percentage of the stops happen at night?
Yeah, that I would have to get, and I can get you that information. There's a good share of stops that do happen at night.
Okay. You think it might be more than 50%?
I would be guessing. Yeah, and I'd rather not guess.
And I want to guess. Okay. And I'd like to, if you can pull it up easily, I'd like to see the pie chart that shows the percentage of people that you think have mental health issues. There was a nice pie chart and I didn't catch it as you went through it. Yes. Yeah, no, that's true.
One second, I'm trying to-
So the yes is the 46, correct?
Yes, correct. 46 is a yes.
And do you have any idea if this checks with what other people, other police departments find?
I'm not aware of us comparing RIPA data.
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar either. However, I do know that Palo Alto has recently updated their dashboard. So unfortunately, they beat us to the punch and do have an interactive dashboard. So likely, very soon, you'll be able to compare Mountain View to other agencies.
Okay.
Might I ask a question? Chief Canfield, is this one of the questions that we augmented, or is this a RIPA required question?
Recommended this one.
Yeah, this is, oh, that's right. Thank you. This is actually a Mountain View Police Department specific question that was recommended by research fellow and now PhD Stevenson. So in fact, it will not be comparable to other agencies.
Hey, Joe, if you care, it looks like it's 525 citations.
Or,
It's like 1,968 stops
for methods.
for tickets.
Tickets?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. 500 out of how many?
1968 looks like.
500 out of 20,000?
No,
Yeah,
1900.
1,900 out
yeah.
of 2,000. Oh, okay. That's not very many. And you went through a slide of complaints, meaning people who come to the police department and complain.
Correct.
And that isn't very many people to start with. And so could we know about the 2 or 3 complaints that were sustainable?
So we had one that's sustained, 2 unfounded. I don't have the specifics on the 2 unfounded. Are we?
Yeah,
Think about
likely.
this.
For the unfounded, I would be interested in the one that was sustained.
Likely what we could do is provide the nature of the allegation. I don't know if that's handy or not, but obviously we can't get into the specifics
Yeah.
of a personnel related matter unless it's something that we're legally allowed or required to release.
I think I could share that it was internally driven. It was
Yeah, if
a minor,
if
yeah.
you're familiar with
I am.
and then the nature, whether it's policy, law, et cetera.
It would be policy.
Somebody made a complaint about.
Another employee that was policy related.
So that was internal police department. Okay, all right, thank you. So that you already answered. And also I can do this later if we could see how the results are broken down by ethnicity.
Or stopped it for stop data?
Not so much as what happens afterwards.
Do you mean complaints or do you mean people that are contacted or detained?
It would be for every slice that you're slicing. I'd like to see it broken down, but I can do that too by myself.
For the RIPA data. to
Yeah.
confirm. That is something that can be done, certainly.
And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair King?
Just a couple questions about my 90. I forget whether or not you said if it's provided in multiple languages. Is it provided in multiple languages?
Well, we haven't created the dashboard for public facing. When we do, then we would make sure that it's options for Spanish speakers. And the chief hasn't determined all the.
We made that inquiry to My 90, and their statement was that it is translatable through the app or through the function on the phone. You can translate into different languages, similar to how one might on Facebook or another format. I have not audited that, but our understanding is that you can answer or read it in different languages.
Another question I had was, can we include a question in My 90 about whether or not the person providing feedback is stably housed?
Want me to answer that one, Captain McGee?
Sure.
We do have some ability to make requests of the vendor. I don't know if that's a question specifically that they would ask, but it's certainly something that we can inquire to see if that's a variable that they can add in. Absolutely.
I just feel like I have no manners in this meeting. Just to follow what you said, like what is the definition of unstably housed to, right? Is it homeless, visible, or families, four families in a one bedroom apartment? Like what's this unstably housed mean? Is something we were to follow up that I would like us to discuss.
If I may.
No.
Member IR, I think one of the benefits of the RIPA data, although that's a different area, is that it is simply the perception of the officer. It may in fact be that the perception of the person completing the survey is simply that they feel unstably housed. And then therefore, someone who feels unstably housed may have a specific response regardless of the metrics that
That's true.
you or I may place on it. But certainly we're open to feedback.
Well, one way is also, is there a physical address for the person? Right, you can make some determinants. I don't know if you live in a vehicle, how you give your address. Post office box or what happens, right?
And I will say that much of the data and the strength of the system is that it remains anonymous. So as we begin to ask specifics, it may make people less likely to complete the survey.
We're talking about my 90. Sorry, I was thinking about RIPA.
Okay.
So
I'm not sure how to transition to the RIPA data from
sorry,
that.
I was thinking, you were saying my 90 and I was thinking RIPA.
Okay.
No.
And RIPA then would be in fact the opinion of the officer, their perception of the person or the circumstances specifically. So in that case, we do have the ability to adjust through Veritone, who's our vendor for our RIPA entry content. Now, I'd have to review the contract to see when we're allowed to add in content and when we're not, but certainly it is capable, the system is capable of adding in other metrics, although I'm reluctant to add in many upon already new and evolving metrics through that system, just to not want to unduly burden officers completing their content. It doesn't mean that there's no space for additional information, to be clear.
Do any other board members have questions or comments?
Just a question on the river, because I was here last year, so I didn't get to see this last year, but is there a way that there can be like the beat on the form as well? Because reading this, it says the address or the location, which is really helpful, but if you were to just look through it, you'd have to go to maps and look at that. If somebody from the community looked at this and was like, oh, it's in this part, because on the website, it clearly states Mountain View and different like beats, right? So is there a way that that can be included in this?
I know that can be added into RIPA collection. We'd have to go
Maybe for
through.
the future,
Yeah, so-
not for this one.
So the company uses Veritone, and so just like we did with the mental health question or perceived mental health concern on a stop, anything could be added, just how much are we going to add? And that would-
Sure.
obviously at the end of the day, that's the chief's direction, but that can be.
Okay,
I will say that our beats, we have 4 beats for the entire city. So it'd be interesting to know the intent or the understanding, because a beat may not give you a real precise understanding of the neighborhood per se, because it is really a larger quadrant.
Sure.
We're not a large city, but certainly you don't get the flavor for a specific area just by beat.
sure.
That can really have a different meaning depending on the part. But I do get your point that the locations entered in, you can review them in keyword search. It is certainly not as easy as if you just saw them on a plot map.
You can do it by neighborhood.
Or maybe neighborhood too. I mean, I just thought beat might be a little less
Yeah.
work because we only have 4, but yeah.
If it's automated, maybe it can just do neighborhood. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Hi, Jen. Just 2 general, super curious minutia questions. There was a thing where folks said that there was something that they would want to see the department do, and one of them was decrease patrol car visibility. And I was wondering, is that seeing less cars or seeing unmarked cars?
No, it was increased.
Got it.
The one was,
Decrease was.
there was 1%
Oh,
decrease.
Let me go back to the,
Just the way, gonna paint the patrol cars pink, hot pink, right?
Lime.
Great.
Before we bring it up, I'm fairly certain that seeing fewer police cars would make the neighborhood feel safer. Not
Interesting.
seeing fewer marked police cars.
Interesting. Okay.
No, there was,
the other way.
they wanted more, didn't they? Yeah, they wanted more,
I go the wrong way.
more patrols.
It's at the end.
That one.
Decreased
Increase,
patrol
yes,
car-
you're right. So less than 1%. Or 1%.
One person.
Yeah, one.
Yeah. Okay, I thought that was what I saw, and I was wondering, like, did they mean like fewer visible patrol cars and more like unmarked cars, and that would make them feel better? Or-
Yeah, that's what I believe. That's what they're asking.
Okay, got it.
Wait a minute, decrease patrol visibility, okay, but most people wanted an increase in it.
Yes, I thought that's what he was referring to, but yes, there was someone that wanted less.
And then the gang violence from the previous screen, is that neighborhood specific?
Since it's anonymous, we don't know,
Got it.
where that person is from or where they were stopped. But there's nothing that asks, what you're referring to.
That's all, thank you.
Any other board members have questions?
I'm sorry, at the beginning, did you want us to we can go through our entire
You can go
list?
through all your questions, yes.
For the SRO complaints, I was gratified to hear that there weren't any. But I'm wondering was that because nobody said anything to you guys? Would there be a benefit in actually asking for feedback?
Well, I do know our staff circles back and very often reaching out to the administrative staff at the schools. And so I think that would be the time where something would be brought forward, but they are reaching out and having continuous communication. So
So it would, you feel confident it would turn up that way?
I believe so.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm that. Social media. I know that Mountain View's social media presence has been really lauded, and I know because you guys need to go and present about social media to other departments. So I'm wondering a couple of things. What are the goals for social media going forward? And because I assume engagement, reach and engagement are probably metrics that are interesting. Is it to just keep increasing those, or are there other broader goals for using social media, especially given that people are expressed interest in additional information sharing?
Yeah, I think that it's always transforming what platforms are being used. And so it's staying on top of how people are wanting to be communicated with. And so staying on top of that, making sure that we're trying to expand our reach. And that's through the messaging as well. And like next door is very focused on neighborhoods, right? And so those kind of messaging is focused on a specific neighborhood that needs to know a certain amount of information or something important for their area. And so I think it's constantly changing. And so just staying on top of how people want to receive messages, how they want to communicate back with us. And so it's constantly evolving.
Is there any talk at all about text messaging folks in Mountain View when there's something active going on? Has that come up at all?
I'm not aware of anything related to.
There is the ability to do a reverse 911, essentially a text message, large push out, if you will. So that is a capability of our dispatch center, our ECC.
Okay.
But the real conversations, the burgeoning issues in emergency communication centers is the next generation 911 abilities, which is really video from your phone in real time to a dispatcher. Certainly text to dispatch, it's new, but it's not going to be probably as groundbreaking and as real time as the impacts of having video and real live information presented immediately into a dispatch center from someone's cell phone or potentially from their home camera, et cetera. Those types of issues are going to be significant.
That might be a future topic. Be interesting. And then I was curious, do people raise calls via social media? Does that happen?
What do you mean by raise
Like,
calls?
I'm having an emergency or I'm concerned. Do people do that via social media or at all?
You'll see people reporting things on a neighborhood. You know, it's either a chat or what's one of them coming to mind, next door, where they're talking, but they haven't reported it to the PD yet. So sometimes we find things that are being mentioned on there first, and then they're being told to call Mountain PD. So
Do you guys monitor social media 24 hours?
Absolutely not.
Oh, no, okay.
Not, our social media channels, although they are monitored regularly, are not intended to supplement 911 or a 6344, which is our not 903-6344, which is our non-emergency number. They have benefit and they have value, and we can push out information rapidly through them in an emergency, but we don't have the ability to monitor 24/7 to receive information. It doesn't mean it never comes in, but it is absolutely not the goal. And I would hope that it does not evolve into that situation, just from a capacity standpoint. And the types of data and information about location and caller information that come in from a 911 call or a 911 text, that is lost through X or Nextdoor or what have you.
I was curious about the timeline, if you have one in mind for MVPDY.
The short answer is no. I can tell you that there are active conversations right now at the department about MVPDY and MVPDX in Spanish. Those are two active programs. There's certainly, capacity is an issue, so we need to look at what staff we have, timeline need, et cetera. But both programs are being actively discussed.
Okay, I'm just asking because MVPDY came up when I was in MVPDX. I was in the very first MVPDX, which was 2020. So it's 3 years later, which is cool. Like, no
It was
hurry.
that long ago already?
Sorry, man. So
I'm sorry.
I just try to be realistic about if it's actively being discussed is because it was active 3 years ago, like I'm just trying to set my expectations better.
Understood. I'm happy to circle back offline once we have maybe a better picture about anticipation and maybe where to put your expectations, which one before the other. I don't have an answer, honestly. But I can tell you that this is the 5th cohort that we've just completed of MVPDX. And in those selection processes, looking at where the majority of the interest was coming from and where there was perhaps less access in general, that was one of the priorities, the ways in which we prioritize those adults, although sometimes young adult, but adult cohorts.
I mean, it's a selfish question. I just want my kid to go through MVPDY while he's still a Y. That's all I'm saying. So if you could make that happen, that would be great. My 90, I had a question. Does everybody who has a contact with MVPD, wanted or not wanted, get the survey? Does it go out to everybody, or is it random distribution of surveys, or how does that work?
They are sent out to non-specific types of calls where they have a cell phone number for the caller. So nothing in which they're a suspect in a crime or
If you get arrested, you don't get to do a
correct.
my
Same
90.
for citations as well. If you get a ticket, you don't. But then,
Oh,
and
okay.
then otherwise, the system does push out a message to everyone whose information is messageable. And then they either choose to or not to complete the survey. I suspect that a lot of people have filters that eliminate random numbers. But that is the process.
Okay. And I'm curious, I know there weren't many folks who said they had a negative interaction, but I am curious about the demographics of that small percentage of folks. I'm curious if it falls into one category or another for race or gender or anything. Is there a way to cut that data offline? I don't know that we can do it here, but.
Could you bring it back?
yeah,
I recall that slide,
yeah.
that all of the negative and very negative were either white or
Yeah, it's on there.
Asian.
Oh, it is on there, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
My printout's black and white, so I can't tell much.
obviously not that way.
You're also like the largest number, right?
Here we go.
There you go.
They're the largest number.
Oh, okay, got it. So then negative and very negative, which is the small percentage overall, were both primarily white and Asian American. Got it. Okay, thank you. That's taken care of. That's cool. Okay, I'm getting there. I'm halfway down the page. For the top safety concerns, was there an option for folks to write in something they were concerned about? Because I saw there were a number of choices, and then there was like, I don't have any concerns, but what about other, like, I'm really concerned about my neighbor's dog or animals, or I don't know. So curious.
I am familiar, as I've sat through a number of meetings with the My90 team, and
Yeah.
no, although we can add categories, they're capable of adding categories if there's areas that are important to them. That's the company.
Right.
The user cannot type in different variables into the situation
Because of the way this system's designed.
based on the design of the system.
Okay, so my feedback would be, it'd be nice if that capability would be available at somewhere on their planning schedule. Because I think if, it's hard to spot a trend in concerns that are growing if people can't report like something that's on their mind. Okay, we talked about increased visibility. I really was hoping you would do hot pink police cars, but okay. Is there, do any cops do foot patrol? Do any officers do foot patrol in Mountain View?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we
Which
have,
neighborhoods?
I think it varies.
I see them downtown, but otherwise I don't think I see anybody on foot.
There's actually quite a few that go on foot. A lot of them use bicycles, and so they'll
Right.
take off the bicycle and they'll get on and they'll go through neighborhoods. And then
Okay,
it's also dependent on if there's specific issues where being on foot's more advantageous,
yeah,
especially if it's nighttime burglaries or whatnot. Driving is not as effective as walking. So
yeah. And when I was hearing, when I saw the more community interaction, I was just curious, is there an opportunity to, if you're not in your car, maybe you could see some of the people and chat with them. I know, I'll just say, when I asked Chief Canfield, I asked him for a coffee because I needed to discuss something. I didn't get any time with him because every 5 feet, somebody's like, I have an issue, or help me with this, and can you solve this? And so I'm like, wow, but the positive side of that is look at all that feedback you're getting, right? So that's why I was curious about that.
And if I can speak to that quickly, we have increased our foot patrol, our purposeful foot patrol for that reason in the downtown area and around the library. And it has had, it's anecdotal, but it has had very positive feedback that has come back.
Okay.
Some of that is both to look for problems and to be present for public safety, but some of that also is just to hear what's important to community members that we might not otherwise come in contact with.
Right. Okay, very cool. I'll just keep my eyes more peeled for that. Okay, we talked about unstably housed RIPA. Does RIPA also flag how many people live in Mountain View versus passing through or working?
we don't track, in the RIPA data, it doesn't track where the person lives. I mean, there's a way, no. That'd be difficult. It'd be real difficult because you'd have to tie it to a stop and then try to figure out if there was a site. It would be, but the simple answer is
Okay,
no.
okay.
No.
Because I know one piece of data that we've heard is when we were talking about profiling, a lot of the folks don't live in Mountain View, right? And so I was just trying to maybe correlate with another data point and try to kind of make more sense of that. So, okay. If it can't, if it's difficult to do, then it's difficult to do. And then finally, my question is the mental health calls that were done for RIPA, that were in the RIPA data, which was like a small percentage, it was like 100 something. I'm curious if there's a way to understand if that was call initiated or a stop. Is there a way to know that?
Yeah, so I think that the link that we have, you can click mental health or not. And if it was a stop or not, and then you can actually separate a traffic stop or not, so you actually can delineate that in the
Okay.
data.
Okay, so when is there gonna be manipulatable?
It's there now. It's there now.
It's there now.
Yeah.
Okay, I have not been on my email.
It's in his last email.
So I could go in and,
The data is manipulatable. It is
as I said.
I practiced it. It's hard work.
I was just doing it for Jillian, so yeah, I know it works.
Perfect.
The goal is to have a dashboard that you don't have to be savvy with Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets to do that
Okay.
with. So that's where we are going. That was delayed because the city was redoing its entire website. Page. I would
Yeah.
encourage you to check out the city's webpage
I have.
and the police department's
I
webpage.
have.
But on that page, now that it's new, is where we will be building our interactive
What
dashboard.
Palo Alto has already done. Is that
Correct.
what you were?
I don't know if they redid their entire city webpage. They may have just.
No,
put
I'm sure they
a
have it.
dashboard
I'm
on
sure
top.
our website's a lot better. Especially the PD page.
Suspect it is.
Okay, I'm done.
I just have one more.
Question?
Yeah, just one more. Is there, Captain McGee, is there any interest in adding Thread to your list of social media outlets? Only because probably so many people here use it because they work there.
Red?
Yeah,
Thread is the Twitter version
it's the
of.
Facebook, the meta
correct?
version, the meta version of.
Meta version,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, that's something I'm gonna have to look into because I
Okay.
didn't even know it existed, to be honest. So a little embarrassed I don't know of a popular.
It's new,
media-
so
okay.
don't know, it's brand new.
I only experience it on Instagram. So
But I will ask that question. Yeah, I'll ask our PIO.
I have one more question. We were talking about patrols and increased foot patrol in downtown and around the library. Do you also have officers in parks patrolling regularly?
Absolutely, that's part of our downtown detail. But in a general sense, that's a definitely a spot that we direct our staff to give special attention to, with children being there and making sure that there's no issues where people are enjoying their time off or whatnot.
Good use of your time.
Does anyone else have additional questions? Great, I have a couple questions. In terms of the My90 data, how does the police department plan on using or implementing the data or the results from the data, or to what extent do you actually, I don't know, what do you plan on using the data for?
The data, I think there's a few areas where I believe the data is really valuable, although I'm interested to see how it evolves and where it proves new value. One way is certainly internally for the entire department, not just the leadership team, but for the entire department to have access to and track and be briefed on that information. I believe it's very important for our officers and for our professional staff to see the opinions and the sentiment and how they're interacting with our community. So I think internally there's a lot of value, but I also want to make sure that it is another interactive dashboard and it's able to be seen externally as well. And similar to what a RIPA dashboard is going to be. I can tell you, I don't know when, to a likely a follow-up question from Sherry R, but I do know that My90 is working actively. They are owned now by Axon. They've been bought by Axon after we became partners with them. And now they are interacting with other Axon platforms, such as
Standards?
thank you, Axon standards, which is how we track our uses of force, our complaint data, et cetera. So the goal is, the long-term goal, and again, I don't have a date, but it's for these systems to interact well and for them to be able to speak to each other and provide observations about red flag information or areas for growth or early intervention in an officer's behavior. So there is a very interesting future ahead for a lot of these systems, but that is not, those timelines are not at all.
I think that's really helpful. And then in terms of how either feedback data, so either RIPA data or I guess more so My90 data, in terms of feedback, like how much does that affect your policy or procedure and changes in that?
I can tell you personally, it really depends on the numbers. If those numbers were reversed, I think we'd have to be really going home and thinking about our lives, right? Really thinking about how we're impacting what we've been doing and what we're missing. Seeing that things are positive, it gives me a good sense of understanding about the work that we're doing, and being able to track how that's changing is really important. Let's say we shift an organizational priority, for example, and subsequent to that shift, I can follow and see how we're residing and how we're landing with our community and what our community's perception is of us. So there's a lot of value just in when we're making changes and operational changes and growth, if it's working positively for the community or not. And certainly, I think beneficial internally for the entire organization to see that as well.
Yeah, I'm asking this because in terms of like the feedback that they would benefit from, for example, like increased police car presence in the community, like if that would be something that you end up implementing, or would you kind of solicit additional feedback? Because I do think that the My90 data does still have some significant bias because it's from people that you've helped, and so they really understand and enjoy your work. But in terms of like if you were going to choose to increase police or patrol presence in the city, how would that kind of play into other feedback mechanisms?
So I can tell you, I think in general, surveys don't tend to have a positive leaning bias. That's my understanding and probably my observation in general. Now, this intentionally does not have people who are arrested or given a ticket, but it does not mean that they only were given a service that they asked for or that everything they wanted they got, if you will. So I think generally people, much like Yelp or other services who go online to complete these surveys, have a very strong feeling. And often that skews towards the negative more than the average. Likely it's probably both extremes and there's a lot in the middle. I can't speak specifically for mine, but how that would affect, that, and that's important for us to know. Certainly the interest in having officers present in communities is fantastic. It would be nice if I could know what neighborhoods are really asking for it and which ones are not. But the strength of that system is the anonymity, and it will make people, or at least it's the belief of the creators of the system, that it will make people less likely to want to engage and provide honest feedback and feel truly anonymous if they have to give too much specific information.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess something that I would just look for personally is if there were going to be like significant policy or procedure changes based on My90 data, that there's other forms of community feedback. I guess this is a form of community feedback, but other forms of community feedback before those kind of changes get made based on the data there. And then just secondly, well, a quick question, can you text 911?
Yes.
Yes, amazing. And then third, I think you brought up MVPDX or MVPDY. I'm a big proponent of doing MVPDX as a child. But also MVPDY, I think maybe this would be a separate conversation, but maybe we could have some emphasis on the interactions with SROs, both like from an Explorer point of view and just like other students. Because I think that might be a good way to generate feedback about SROs, because I don't want it to just also be complaint. I think there's a lot of feedback that might not reach the level of complaint that could be really beneficial to the program. So those are my comments.
And so MVPDY giving feedback on SROs?
And others, but I think having some sort of emphasis on that, because that's what's most relevant to youth would be good. Cool. Do any other board members have questions? I'm gonna open it to public comment.
I have one question. For the Latino Community Advisory Council, so the last meeting, there were two people there. There was you, and then there was Lieutenant Vespicia. So my question is, what is the plan for other officers who are Spanish speaking or Latino identifying, whatever the link is, or somebody who's an imposter who shows up? What's the plan for engaging folks or giving folks the opportunity to engage with that council or the faith leader council? Because I know everybody can't come to every meeting, but how does the broader staff get a flavor of what's going on and what's happening?
The broader internal staff.
Correct.
So I can tell you that there are a number of internal activities that give our staff opportunities to have broader understanding of the community. Last night, for example, we had a late evening with the Spanish Language Leadership Academy.
Right.
I think that ran about 9:30 or so at night, but there was students, deep dialogue, and I think we probably had 12 officers come through, many of whom spoke about different areas, but some just came in to be involved and engaged and hear the things that were important to that leadership academy. Some of them are Hispanic or Latino in heritage, others were not, just interested, and certainly it would be for any employee who's interested and available. There's a lot of value, regardless of their individual background, to have access and understanding and engagement with our Latino community.
So it's getting advertised internally, is that my takeaway, that the meetings are
Correct. So
happening?
these types of programs are absolutely advertised internally. I don't think as much the two chiefs advisory bodies are advertised internally, as they're really more designed for dialogue at the executive level leadership of the department. It doesn't always have to be the chief, but they're really for hearing concerns that may or may not want to be shared with the rank and file of an organization. Doesn't mean they can't be, but certainly there's an intimacy associated to having deep conversations and dialogue directly with a chief or a captain. I want to make sure that is still intact. But I'll be honest, this is my first LCAC meeting, and certainly, I'm open to input and observing how the group and the interactions evolve over time. And I don't think that they will just remain stagnant and not change the manner in which we share and exchange information and interact internally.
Thanks.
Would any member of the public like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand feature or dial star 9. We have one, Bruce England.
Thank you. Bruce England again, member of MVCPRA. Get to my questions for you. Just of course in a different window. Give me a second. Okay, so I think I've got 5, which I can go through pretty quickly here. So you were just talking about MBPDY. Something I wondered about when I read about that is that there can be a benefit to having all demographic representation in one room. And I wonder if that can be accommodated in any way, having youth and adults together sharing ideas. I'm not suggesting eliminating MBPDY, just having an opportunity. And maybe it is possible. Maybe somebody in high school could sign up for MBPDX and they wouldn't be blocked. That would be great. My second one is that I haven't heard about the cessation of private companies' predatory towing practices. And I'm wondering how that was publicized, because I know that can be a concern on the vehicle for the vehicle residents. Next, in the My90 customer feedback survey, do you have ideas on why the age demographics are so different from those for the population as a whole? They're pretty strikingly different. And then saying the MOU with the Mountain View Wisdom School District that it can be found on the police department section of the city webpage isn't ideal for telling folks where to look. It can be confusing, and just asking in the future if you could be more explicit about where they should look. And lastly, in the RIPA data categories, are those strictly speaking set outside of MBPD? Maybe they are, but I'm wondering about some of these categories. Like you've got Middle Eastern or South Asian as a category, which seems odd, at least to me, and maybe it would be better to have something more like Middle Eastern and Asian instead. I'm sure this has been considered, thought about, and talked about, but I'm just pointing it out. And similarly, the categories trans male and trans female read binary to me. And I wonder if those are the best ways to categorize too. They can be for some people, but if you include non-binary, that could be another option for people to fill out. Lastly, I don't understand the categories disability perceived, NA and other. And I wonder if something was lost in the file conversion, because I really couldn't make sense of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other?
Yes, next we have Alex Brown.
Manipulable.
Is that all?
I think that
He said it right.
What was that?
It's okay. Okay,
Alex.
I will now bring.
Translate?
no,
It is
we need
now.
more.
Oh, one more? Okay.
Next we have Miriam Connor.
Hi, so I'm Miriam Connor, Rex Manor resident, also a member of MVCPRA. It was very cool reading about the community committees, the advisory committees that have been created. like talking with folks at MVCPRA, we all think that's really cool. We'd love to know like how you can increase participation in both across the community, and also how you figure out which advisory committees to create, because I can imagine lots of other groups who might be useful to the PD. For example, vehicle residents, that might be a difficult one, or folks who provide public services via nonprofits and other organizations could be a useful one. And then finally, would love to know more about the faith representation on the Faith Leadership Committee, not just which faiths are represented, but also who's representing them, because even within a single faith, there can be a lot of diversity of thought. And then a separate thing, I see, as you guys have noted, a lot of community members asking to see more presence of patrol cars. And that strikes me as like a pretty expensive solution to a problem, is to have more officer cars on the streets rather than sort of responding to issues and calls. So I would at least want to know that that was really going to be effective at increasing public safety before the PD actually undertook that. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any additional public comments? Okay, I will now bring this back to the PSAP for discussion. Do any board members have comments?
What's that? I just wanted to raise, there was a couple of questions, I think from Mr. England that I actually had a question about. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Binary, non-binary?
Well, oh yeah, I wanted to say I support those terms versus trans female, trans male, sort of summarizing it. There are more. Is there not enough room?
If I may, Member Ayar, to answer your question or address your concern, the categories are not set by us, they are set by the state. There is some evolution starting next year where some of the categories will be changing, and our new data will reflect that, but we do not make those selections. They are uniform across the state. I don't think we could change them.
They're state, man, okay, they're state things. Okay, well, sometimes the state's a little bit behind, so interesting. Then he asked, did anyone understand the question he was asking about the age demographics don't line up? Did anyone understand what that question was about specifically? Because I was like, oh, and then I couldn't find which chart he was referring to.
I'm sorry, I was in the bathroom.
I think it was the My 90, the age demographics of the respondents to My 90, not representing the age demographics of the city as a whole. Is what I
Oh,
heard.
is that what it was?
That was my understanding as well.
Did you want to look at that slide?
Yeah, could we?
I will say that the population as a whole
Yeah.
does not necessarily reflect the number of people, the population that contacts and uses the services equally with the police department, nor does it equate to the number of people that, the population that may want and feel more comfortable completing surveys online.
Okay, so it may,
It's not scientific.
Let's see which direction it is. Oh, that way.
you'll get dizzy.
There you go.
So I'm wondering if it's the high numbers that over 46 specifically.
We don't have data specifically on who calls us for calls for service.
Right.
It's not a metric that we could realistically report.
It's hard to-
accurately reflect. Anecdotally, I'm surprised the number is as high for the 46 to 60 and 61. I would have thought it would skew somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But I think I have a bias towards anticipating people younger than me using their phones more for surveys.
Is it a conscious or unconscious bias? It's
Conscious.
a conscious bias. Okay, Bruce, if you're still listening, if we didn't answer your question, then let me know and I can bring it up next time.
Great. I will now close item 5.3. This is city manager member. Can we take a 5-minute break?
Certainly.
All right, I'm next.
You're back. We are going to move on to item 5.3, ad hoc committee recommendations on bias and extremism in policing. This item will be presented by Police Chief Mike Canfield and the subcommittee.
There. Let me give a little test of the. Okay. Thank you, everyone. This is the presentation from the ad hoc committee on recommendations on bias and extremism in policing. A brief presentation overview. We'll go into a little bit of background on this work plan item, as well as cover the CLEAR Act and the state auditor's report. Give a work. The ad hoc subcommittee members will provide an overview of their work, and they will provide an overview of the recommendations to the PSAP. This is a work plan item, and it came about from on the work plan for the fiscal year 22-23. It was approved by City Council in September of 22. And as you recall, November 17th of 2022, the PSAB received a presentation on extremism in policing, and specifically the CLEAR Act and the state auditor's report. And it was at that meeting that the PSAB selected an ad hoc committee consisting of Vice Chair Tang, Member Frink, and at the time, Member Sandu. Upon Member Sandu's completion of his term, it left a vacancy on that ad hoc subcommittee or ad hoc committee, which Member Souter took over and got up to speed on voluminous information. During that November 17th meeting, the ad hoc committee provided the following, or was provided the following action steps. And they were to receive an overview of the CLEAR Act and the state auditor's report, and receive updates on upcoming implementation of the CLEAR Act, receive MVPD's general orders related to bias-based complaints, as well as the procedures of the MVPD related to bias-based complaints. And then to review MVPD's training related to bias and extremism in our demographics, and recruiting practices related to race, ethnicity, and gender diversity, and to explore and develop recommendations on ways to ensure that the police department is addressing bias and implementing best practices. And before we go into the recommendations and work, I just want to give a quick overview of that CLEAR Act and of the state auditor's report. The CLEAR Act, also Assembly Bill 655, that's the California Law Enforcement Accountability Reform Act. It was written following the January 6 riots as a result of, I believe it was somewhere around 12 to 15 off-duty officers being present in some capacity at the insurrection. To be clear, there were no Mountain View or local officers there. But as a result, that kind of spurred the conversation. And AB 655 also referenced I think it was a 2006 FBI report linking potential white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement organizations, as well as looking at a sheriff's department text messaging scandal, essentially, that was addressing issues of racist and homophobic text messages and images that were being shared within an organization. Those are all the inspiration, if you will, for that CLEAR Act. And the CLEAR Act includes requirements specifically for law enforcement agencies to investigate incidents of hate and hate crime affiliation, or the support of a hate crime by or a hate organization by a police officer. And it requires the removal of a police officer upon sustained allegation of that support or membership in a hate group. It enacts background investigation requirements that ensure, as part of a background investigation for a peace officer being selected, that the background investigators examine their affiliation and association in support of any hate groups, and provided clear definitions of what a public expression of hate is and what a hate group is. And it really, one thing it did was it unified across the state what the expectations and requirements were, but also strengthened employer rights and an agency's ability to separate and fire, essentially, somebody who was found guilty. So it strengthened organization agencies' rights to separate from employment and made that clear. That went into effect January of this year, 2023. I can say that the CLEAR Act is not nearly as depth, as in-depth, as long, or as complex as the state auditor's report. The state auditor's report, which was published in 2022 and started in 2021, that's a fairly robust document. I think it's about 120 pages, maybe more. It is a review of bias and extremism in 5 law enforcement agencies across the state. They're large and mid-size agencies. They were the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, San Jose Police Department, San Bernardino Police Department, Stockton Police Department, and then lastly, California Department of Corrections or Rehabilitation. That's our prison guards. They are also peace officers in the state of California. The report examined their internal affairs investigations, their procedures for internal affairs investigations, their hiring practices, their racial demographics, their bias-related policies, and it looked at some 450 social media accounts of those officers or peace officers. Those would be public accounts that they were able to find. Of those accounts, none were found to have affiliation or association to hate groups, but there were in each of those agencies examples of bias, either through internal affairs investigations that they discovered or through their social media accounts. And there were a total of 17 incidents in those 5 agencies. And that was either on duty or off. The items were predominantly derogatory language and hate speech in nature. The state auditor's report, and forgive the verbose slide, but it has a number of key areas in that report. The 5 main key areas that the state auditor's report focused on was representative diversity, community engagement, employee training, identifying biased behavior, and then the investigation of alleged biased behavior. In that report, they really made specific recommendations to specific agencies, but there were some general best practice recommendations. And I just want to cover a few of those here before we proceed. The formalizing of recruiting strategies that emphasize representative diversity, formalizing community engagement strategies that connect to diverse communities, formalizing processes for early identification and intervention of potential bias indicators, and then structuring oral board questioning during the hiring process to specifically evaluate a candidate's ability to gauge their ability to interact with a culturally diverse population, so their cultural competence, if you will. And they establish a framework for consistently identifying and investigating incidents of bias within the agencies. And then there were 3 more recommendations that were significant. Some internal investigations into bias, and that the recommendation was the bias should be, they should greater incorporate the feeling of bias rather than the officer's indication that they were being biased. Next was the background investigators in the hiring process should contact all secondary references and ask those secondary references if there's an example or a belief that the applicant is either biased or associated to a hate group, et cetera, or an extremist group. A secondary reference, for example, is if I was applying to be a police officer and I listed Captain McGee as a reference and Sherry Yar was my background investigator, she might then ask Captain McGee if anybody else knows me, and then she would contact that secondary reference with the expectation that there's different information, the more degrees of separation that a background investigator goes. And then lastly, that those same background investigators would do a robust investigation into the social media platforms of the applicants, looking specifically for bias or extremism or support of hate groups, essentially. There are some issues with those last 3 recommendations. Speaking specifically to background investigators looking at social media, absolutely a background investigator can and will look at public social media accounts, but we are not allowed to, or they are not allowed to by law, direct an applicant to unlock, in California, unlock that applicant's social media account, nor can they have them provide the passwords for those accounts. Similarly, related to the bias conversations with secondary, what's the term that I was using? Secondary references. Thank you, Captain McGee. Those are absolutely done across the board by our background investigators. I don't know if it was a law before, but it is absolutely has been in practice and is a current practice in the department. It has been for some time. And our standard for the last question, our standard for investigating sustaining an allegation is whether an incident is more likely than not to have occurred. So although the officer's feeling of whether or not something was biased is relevant, the threshold is essentially a 51% more likely than not that bias was present, that it affected, that there was a sustained allegation of bias is a more likely than not did the officer feel that they were being biased. That is not the standard that we use when we conduct an internal affairs investigation related to a bias-based complaint. That is not only industry standard, but it is both defensible and a very fair practice. With that, I would like to turn the slide. Do you want me to click, Vice Chair?
Sure.
Slide to the next.
Right, so the ad hoc committee took a deep look into the CLEAR Act and all 118 pages of the state auditor's report. Ill advised to try to do that on an hour flight home, by the way, and numerous sections of the MVPD policy. And as you can see, that would be the complaint procedures, bias, and tattoos. We also drafted questions and areas for review and interviewed MVPD staff in charge of investigating allegations of misconduct, the recruiting team overseeing the hiring process and the background investigations. Member Frank and former member Alsandu, thank you. We interviewed Carrie Shui, Armando Espedia, and Mason Motomura. Just wanted to give recognition to them as being our interviewees. I'm not sure if if those are the same people that Member Sauter also interviewed on upon her induction into our ad hoc committee. But our interviews included questions about policy, practice, and procedure, as well as hiring and the staff demographics data. Thank you. Okay, so we also compared the current state of the department and its policies, the procedures and practices to that of the content and the recommendations in the CLEAR Act and the auditor's report. We had a specific focus on diversity efforts in recruiting, investigations of bias and other misconduct, background investigations for hiring, appearance, and tattoos. And the state post required bias training. And we and the staff noted that much of the issues related to the findings or recommendations of the CLEAR Act and the state auditor's report were addressed in other legislation or existing policies and practices of MVPD, which was nice to see.
And with that, I will turn the slide and go to Member Sauter for recommendations from the ad hoc committee.
For the recommendations, recommend the MVPD should continue to comply with exiting city post legal and legislative requirements regarding training, hiring, and investigations of misconduct. Number two, MVPD should ensure a focus on recruiting and training qualified applicants who represent the diversity of Mountain View, which includes developing a formal MVPD recruiting plan that addresses recruiting efforts that represents the diversity of our community, develop a process for monitoring data on the diversity of applicants, new hires, and existing personnel, incorporating the feedback from the LCAC and FLAC to inform the recruiting plan, hiring process, and department training. And lastly, formalize in-house training with new and lateral officers to include cultural appreciation of the diverse community in Mountain View, the values of the city and department of the culture of the Mountain View Police Department as a community partner. For number 3, MVPD should prioritize the assessment of applicants' ability to work with Mountain View's diverse community by incorporating questions designed to gauge cultural competency into the hiring process interviews. Under that, the MVPD should consider inviting chiefs advisory committee members or other community stakeholders to meet with hiring panels and the police chief to provide input on the characteristics and qualities they desire in their Mountain View Police Department officers. Lastly, for number 4, Mountain View Police Department should continue to seek and grow opportunities for community engagement and to use those opportunities to promote awareness of the diversity of Mountain View for all officers in the department, providing valuable connections and insights into our unique Mountain View community. Mountain View should continue to survey our community to assess effectiveness of communication and solicit feedback on the department's performance and look for areas of disparity amongst our diverse community. Seek to provide those survey tools in the languages predominantly spoken in the Mountain View community. For number 6, Mountain View Police Department should continue to work with their vendors whose products cover use of force, pursuit driving, complaints, and customer satisfaction to identify opportunities to adopt systems designed to identify potential issues or patterns of conduct and provide early opportunities for intervention and training. And lastly, Mountain View Police Department should continue to report data allegations of bias misconduct to the PSAB and include a specific notification in the twice yearly report on Mountain View Police Department performance and feedback to PSAB if such allegations are sustained.
That concludes the presentation from staff and the committee. So I will leave the slides up in case we want to go to questions, but with that, we'll turn it over to the board. Chair.
Thank you. And thanks to the subcommittee for the presentation. I will now ask if the board has any questions. I think on our agenda, so just making sure that we all get our questions through, and then we can go back for more discussion after. But just making sure that each member has a chance to ask all their questions. Okay, so do any board members have questions? Yes.
There was 2 or 3 mentions of tattoos. What's the issue with tattoos? Is it because some might be identify people as being members of gangs?
Or it could be an indicator, Member Brodowski, of affiliation or support of an extremist ideology. Although we have not had that issue, my understanding is that it has happened. I think it was, and I believe it was cited in either the explanation for AB 655 or in the auditor's report, but I believe it was a prison guard in South or the East ended up having, I believe it was neo-Nazi affiliation, and that was cited as a reference.
So if you're interviewing somebody, you ask him to take off his shirt so you can see his tattoos.
So tattoos are photographed and included in the background packet as long as they're in a modest location, an acceptable location for professional reviewing. Those are both described in written documentation in a background investigator's packet, and then also examined throughout that process and are evaluated, quite frankly, in the selection process.
Learned something. Thank you.
That's all.
What are you trying to say?
Like she always has the best questions. That's I look forward to it.
Anything about these things.
Do any other board members have questions?
That's the question. Although clearly I don't have the best questions, but I'm still gonna ask them. What happened? Why can't you read the state auditor report on a 1 hour flight?
It's 118 pages.
Oh, so you,
I thought
You didn't have
I
enough
could
time.
do it
Oh,
in that
okay.
time.
I
Yeah.
thought something.
I
there was
didn't
a
finish
big-
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, inquiring minds. I'm not 100% clear ad hoc committee members. What recommendations did the state auditor make that you are specifically not recommending that MVPD adopt? Not clear on that.
It wasn't that we didn't recommend that they adopt them. It was more so we took a look at, like, when we were interviewing MEPD staff, it seemed like some of those recommendations have already been in place, like during
Okay.
hiring.
So is there anything that the auditor recommended that Mountain View PD is not currently or will not be in the future, I mean, foreseeable future doing? Is there anything that it's like, nope, we're not gonna do that?
Vice Chair, if I may.
Good.
Certainly the examination of private social media accounts is
Well,
one of
that's-
those things.
State, I mean, I don't understand how the state auditor recommended that if it's against the law to do that, so. Okay,
Isn't it just against the law to make them give up their passwords? It's not against the law to look at it if you can get access.
We will continue to look at publicly accessible social media if we will
Okay.
not look
Got
at
it.
closed social media.
and not that one, anything else?
I would have to look at a line by line item, but there were recommendations that were specific for specific law enforcement agencies
Right.
in the state auditor's report.
That might not be applicable.
That may not be applicable. Certainly, I think when you look at an agency like the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation,
Yeah.
or Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, those are tough comparables, both in culture and in size and
Right.
scale to the Mountain View Police Department.
Okay. I'm not sure how to close my question because I still have the question, but I don't know. I don't know if it requires me to read 124 pages and ask if certain things are actually happening. Or, do you know what I mean? Because if,
You could just skip straight to the recommendation section if you want.
well, no,
That would be my recommendation.
okay, so take their recommendation section and map it to our recommendation section and ask if I think anything is not currently happening.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Will the ad hoc committee continue to be available for questions?
Do you mean like offline? Do you mean like right now?
Or when, or this is not, or are you guys disbanding? You guys are still available?
I mean, that depends on whether or not we
Okay,
believe.
just-
I mean, if the PSAB as a whole feels that they can accept the recommendations, then the group would have completed its work. If the PSAB as a whole has additional questions or requests additional work of the subcommittee, then the subcommittee would continue.
I don't know if I have additional work because I have to look at these recommendations and map them up because I feel like I have questions, so.
Well, I mean, that could be something that became direction of the PSAB as a whole if it was supported by the majority of the PSAB members. That analysis be done.
Do you have additional questions at the moment?
I do not, thank you.
Do any other board members have questions? I have a question. So for recommendation 4, which talks about, or just in general, MVPD continuing to seek and grow opportunities for community engagement with police officers. I think that's really important. And I'm wondering if you could provide some examples of how you do that. I think one thing I want to keep in mind is to be careful that these opportunities for engagement don't result in police officers having to take on additional jobs, like kind of additional jobs or duties that aren't necessarily within their job description, but more so that they are actually kind of opportunities for engagement that people want to be engaged with and that police officers will have valuable, will gain valuable insight from.
So I will say that certainly all the things that the officers would be doing would fall within the scope of their job description. Community engagement does fall within the job description. However, I'm not going to advocate for compulsory community engagement. I think it, one, speaks for the need for enjoyable, positive, interactive engagement where officers want to be there. At this point in our organization and in our relationship with our community, the community engagement opportunities have been extremely positive and rewarding for officers, even when the topics are pressing relevant issues related to community concerns. They're still very rewarding by and large for our officers. And the feedback that I received from our officers is very positive. For example, yesterday evening's meeting, there were conversations about policing, the types of policing and concerns about policing in general. That was not the majority concern, but certainly those are issues that were addressed and brought up. And the sentiment after that event from virtually, well, from everyone that I spoke to, but from probably 12 officers that were there, was how wonderful that opportunity was to engage and how much they want to do more of that. So it won't be compulsory, but certainly those opportunities, making sure that officers are aware of them in advance, are familiar with what the groups are, who the groups will be there, and what is important to them, I think is a great opportunity for us internally to really provide access and remove barriers from our officers to these different community groups and different engagements. Officers that are accustomed to doing that work do it a lot, but that is not necessarily the case across shifts and teams and types of work. So looking for opportunities that definitely support number 4 and looking for opportunities to expand that access and make sure that it's welcome for officers.
So just to clarify, kind of allowing more officers to engage in opportunities that already exist, for example, like coffee with a cop or something, rather than kind of creating new opportunities or avenues?
I believe both are applicable to number 4, seeking opportunities for growth, both of those engagements, but also in the access for our officers. And to your point that you brought up before, Chair, certainly capacity is always an issue, and we don't have a ton of staff capacity. Our officers are working very hard. Our administrative staff and our administrative positions, sergeants and lieutenants that put together these events, and our community outreach folks, I don't want to say they're at max capacity and there can be nothing else added, but certainly we come to a point where to add something has to be taken away. So that is always a concern and a variable that we have to kind of play and look at who's available and how much capacity we have. So that is a concern, but that's something that we can manage.
Thank you. Other board members have questions? So I'll now open this item to public comment. Are there any?
First, we have Bruce England.
Thank you. Bruce England again from MVCPRA. I just have a couple of comments here. Let's see, got to jump to the file. Okay, here we go. Yeah, wondering about how robust the community advisory bodies are required to be. I see that the recommendation is coming from the state. Not sure of their requirements. Regardless, what is the interpretation by MVPD regarding fulfilling the state's recommendation on this? I think in the community, we're interested in seeing these being very robust, both of these. They seem very important to the whole process within Mountain View. And then page 4 of the report says, I'm just going to quote it, the PD should consider inviting the Chief's advisory committee members or other community stakeholders to meet with hiring panels and the police chief to provide input on the characteristics and qualities they desire in their MVPD officers. So how can MVCPRA and members of the public know what might come of this now, or it hasn't happened yet, but in the near future and also over time? So these are questions, maybe committee members will pick this up, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there?
Next, we have Miriam Connor.
Hi, thanks. Miriam Connor of MVCPRA again. So one thing that I was interested to learn about in the report and the recommendations were the existing state laws, and particularly the one that says officers aren't eligible to serve as officers if there is a discovery of bias in addition to other issues. And I'm really curious how you can really know that. And then also on top of that, I think a lot of in the more academic space, the contemporary research suggests that you're not going to find almost anyone in the general population that is actually free of these biases. So I'm curious what the standard is, because if you were to do kind of the robust psychological tests that they do in an academic setting, you probably wouldn't be able to hire anybody. And then I'm also curious how PSAB may be able to help set these do research or set standards for identifying bias, or if that's something where these community advisory committees to the police department could be useful in how, the Latino Community Advisory Committee, if they have ways that they perceive bias that could be incorporated into those scans, basically. Thank you.
Next, we have Dana Peaty.
Hi there, Dana Peaty, MVCPRA, short and sweet. We wanted to give particular shout out to recommendation number 7 around reporting the data for allegations of bias misconduct to the PSAB, and specifically notifying in the yearly report around feedback data when the allegations are sustained. We thought that one was particularly important. Thank you.
Next, we have Tim McKenzie.
Hi all, Tim McKenzie, he, him pronouns. I'd like to echo some of the things that I heard earlier from the previous commenters, especially the policy recommendations PSAB can have. That's really where this body can have an impact. But I would have liked to see more. This looks like part of the recruitment and retention efforts, which I know is another subcommittee that was planning on being formed, or I forget if that ended up on the work plan, but that was part of the discussion. And with this anti-extremism report and how we consistently say that Mountain View is a leader and kind of a role model for other cities, I'd like to see more than let's see if we can hire more diverse people. Representation is very important. We need to have all of our workforces represent the full diversity of our communities, but no group is a monolith, and to assume that just because we have individuals that hold certain identities means that bias will dissipate is itself kind of is a false assertion. And I wish that I would see more about specific policies to exactly counteract extremism. Bias and extremism are not the same thing. The 2006, I think it was, I may be off on my date, the FBI put out something about white supremacist extremists infiltrating law enforcement. That is a different thing than someone holding bias. And I would have loved to see this body look into specific policies or things that PSAB can have an impact on, and ways that we can impact policies to root out extremism and make sure that it never can take hold. And just putting it as bias kind of undercuts the seriousness of the situation. Extremism and white supremacy are horrible ideologies that say that people based on their immutable qualities are lesser, and that is not okay. None of us in the community agree or believe with that. And that was my understanding of what this committee was looking to combat. And hearing that it's more about recruitment and retention for police officers is a disappointment. Thank you.
Do we have additional public comment? I will now bring this back to the PSAB for discussion, and then Amber, could you tell us what next steps are after the comments?
Well, there's a recommendation from the subcommittee and from the chief on the in the report, and following conversation, those recommendations would either be retained as is or modified, and a motion be made to approve and a vote taken on those recommendations.
That's good. Thank you. Do any board members have comments? Want to discuss?
I have a question. I like all of these recommendations. I have a little bit of trouble kind of endorsing a recommendation that doesn't have like kind of a timeline to it, right? So like develop a formal recruiting plan that addresses recruiting efforts that represent the diversity of community. I think that's a great idea. Is that going to happen in the next year? Is it an urgent development? Is it next 5 years, right? I don't have a sense of it, and where possible, I like recommendations that are a little bit more tangible in terms of when we think it might happen or when it's on the PD work plan, so that we can kind of monitor it and, kind of check on status. And some of them say develop, some of them say seek to. So I don't know how to track if you're seeking, are you seeking or not? So the wording for me is a little, it's vague enough that I'm not sure how to check on progress. Does that make sense? This is me with my ex-corporate hat on, but I just need really, really clear verbs.
I wanted to make sure this was on record, because I did push out recommendation 7, that MVPD should report the allegations of bias misconduct. And I recognize that some of us have been a little frustrated with the amount of information we have gotten on the twice yearly feedback data, because understandably we can't get into personnel files. And so I think I hope that on record that since those personnel files, if there's a sustaining of if there's a sustained complaint of bias misconduct, then that personnel file would need to be public record anyway, that we would be able to then get the facts of the complaint, like what happened, what the findings were, and then the consequences, because I think the public needs to be informed of those incidences. And so I'm not sure if the language in 7 caught my intentions for the recommendation. So I just wanted to say that out loud.
When we're discussing, do we raise hands?
I think indicating that you want to speak is good in any way.
Yeah. And I just wanted to clarify, Vice Chair, so are you suggesting that?
Okay, sorry.
I would have made a rude comment if someone had done that to me. I'm so sorry. I was looking at Jeanette and talking to you. Sorry, Eva. Are you suggesting that recommendation 7 is made more clear that the details of the details of sustained allegations are made public?
Let me review the language real quick.
Okay, because I just want to be clear what you're on record on.
I guess it doesn't include the details that I just stated.
Okay.
So
Canfield, could you respond in terms of what would be publicly accessible information that could be shared?
Absolutely. Vice Chair, so I just want to make sure I understand. For sustained allegations of bias, and for background, a sustained allegation of bias would be made publicly accessible upon request by the police department. So the file in totality So that is something that is made publicly accessible by law. And so if you were asking, so I understand, in that twice annual report, you'd like to know what the nature of the allegation was, what the finding of the investigation was, and then the discipline associated to that case. Is that accurate?
I think I'm amending that. I think even sooner than the twice yearly report would be ideal. I think this was in reference to a personnel file. This is in response to a personnel file that was pulled by the media earlier this year. And having not heard about it until the media had contacted me about it, I think it would be beneficial to the public that it were reported to the PSAPs, I guess, sooner than the twice yearly feedback data, so that the public can know this is what happened, this is how we dealt with it, if that makes sense. So I guess as soon as it would be that the personnel file would have to be made available upon request, like, is that after you make the findings, or is after?
Correct, yeah, be after the findings. I'd have to look at the exact timeline for requirements. There may be an internal appeal process that needs to expire first before that would be made public. I'd have to exactly examine that with the city attorney's office, but a finding would have to happen first before it's released.
Member Ayer.
Vice Chair Tang. So point 7, just continuing the clarification of it, says bias misconduct. Are you saying bias misconduct or all misconduct?
It would have to be bias misconduct because personnel files are not made public except in bias and use of, is it use of force? Deadly force, yeah. Like just discharge of.
So those are the only two kind of up for grabs.
Yeah.
I see.
There are actually, I believe, dishonesty, sexual assaults, and is there a 5th category off the top of my head? I believe there's 5, but certainly those additional categories as well
Okay.
are subject to full release.
Okay, then I would say if we're going down a path for full release, then we should get full release on all the ones that are available to us.
Work of this committee is related though to
That's
bias.
That's why, like, that's like it's bias here, but it seems like you're talking about something more. So I'm not sure how to bring that up, maybe in the next section for another topic, but.
On 7, I would like to see that information on bias specifically. I think for other things, maybe we can talk about that later in the meeting of things that we might want to pursue in the future. I agree with Member Ayer on that. I would like to, even if it's just subcommittee members, like verbalizing the timeline on some of these. I think that would be very helpful, but I like the recommendations, so I would appreciate if there's thoughts on timeline or benchmarks, I guess.
I just would like to comment that a member from the public may be confused that this is the only list of points that they use in hiring. I just wanted to make it plain that their hiring requirements are already very comprehensive, and many of the things that person was asking about are already in their process. And these are just additional things that we were hoping to add to that process.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. I guess I would just like to know the development of, especially the ones where it says develop, of like when maybe you think that would be done by. Just, you know.
Would it please the chair if there was feedback provided upon completion of the item, so it was brought back either and assume it could be in an unagendized, like a comment from the board or staff at the end that items have been incorporated. Is that adequate?
Yes, I think just having some sort of update, and especially for the public as well, of kind of the status of these would be great.
So notifications, so I understand, notifications made at PSAB meetings upon completion or development of these 7 items.
Yes.
So, but I don't think that's satisfactory because you might not come back for, I mean, I'm not saying this will happen, but you might not come back until 3 years from now and say, oh, this is done, right? But so I think giving some indication, I think coming back with some indication of like, on your work plan, where do these fall? Right? Are they like really low priority? Are they like the next year? Like I really think we need some sort of indication. Because if you only notify us when once it's done, some of us may have rolled off the board by then. So, give us the help us manage our expectations.
Chief Canfield, is that something, I'm guessing is not something that we could go through the recommendations in real time and develop that kind of expectation of timeline?
Correct. It would be difficult. And in fact, some of these will involve further conversations with human resources and external stakeholders, as well as internal conversations about capacity and staff aptitude, perhaps even what training is required before they can be developed. I would love to be able to give you a commitment on time, but I don't want to give you a commitment that I can't make. I can tell you that some items are easier than others to implement. And certainly as I examine that list of 7 items, which is not a light list for me, from my perspective, from a staff perspective, I support these items, but they are not easy lift for us to do. But I would prioritize the ones that we can adapt the quickest and begin to implement, and then look at what it would take to implement the rest.
So if I might, as a process suggestion, you have options before you as a board. If I'm hearing by and large that there was some change to the intention around item recommendation 7, but otherwise that these recommendations have the support of the board, just that there's a desire for 2 things. One, a sense of time frame so that the expectation is clear, and that time frame would be what it would be in terms of what was possible and for the implementation of the items. And the other is wanting to have report out on the completion of the items. So I see the option being that you can accept the recommendations and give direction that there be a follow-up presentation or item that places those timeframes on the items. And then a further follow-up item that reports on the implementation when the items are implemented. And/or you could decide not to adopt the recommendations pending that work. And if you are generally supportive of the recommendations, that first path might be one that would be a good way to keep the effort moving forward.
What would the timeline be, Assistant City Manager, for coming back with the presentation in your mind?
I'd have to ask the chief. We'd have to plot that out sometime within the next.
Off the cuff, my feeling is it would take a couple of months to sit down, reach externally to get feedback, but not more, not to complete, but to give timelines and timeframes. A couple of months, maybe 3 months seems adequate to do the outreach. I will say going over the holiday season makes it a little bit more difficult to get a hold of some external folks. So it does present some challenges, but I think a 3-month
like February's meeting, if we have a meeting in
I
February.
believe that a February timeline would be realistic.
Put up a motion.
Report back.
I just would like to put up a motion that we accept these with the amendments and see where it falls.
By amendments, do you mean
The-
like the updates?
The updates for 7, yeah.
For 7 and, yes,
A second. Am I allowed a second as vice chair?
Do you?
Okay, okay. I was like, wait, am I allowed?
Can I, point of clarification, is the motion also that we would do a February presentation for an update on what we think the dates for these things are?
I move to amend the motion with the February date of the presentation for.
Is that allowed?
For Rick, yeah.
Certainly, motion can be to accept the staff recommendation as amended with what, and I'd like to be clear on what the amendment to item recommendation 7 is, and with further direction to staff to return in approximately 3 months or return as soon as possible with an implementation timeline.
I can second.
I think you're the
Well, I'm
motion.
talking about her amendment.
You're accepting her
I'm
amendment.
accepting her amendment.
As I restated it.
Yes.
What she said.
Yes, what she said.
And can we go to recommendation 7? Say to report data allegations of bias misconduct to the PSAB and include a specific notation. So I think there were 2 things that were being discussed for a change to this. One is that it not wait for the twice yearly report on the Mountain View Police Department performance and feedback data. And also that it be made clear that this would include the nature of the bias, misconduct, the findings, and the discipline, and are all those things that are by law required to be released if there is a sustained allegation of bias misconduct.
Staff, from my perspective, would support that, and that's manageable, and that was my understanding.
But by law, we are
I'm sorry,
both allowed to and required to
correct.
release those things.
All 3 of those categories are releasable by law
Okay. All right.
upon request, and I would deem that this would be a request.
This is the request that happen and not wait until the twice yearly report. Does that capture the intent of what you meant for amending 7?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
We take a roll call vote.
If there's no further discussion, I can take a roll call vote on the motion by Member Frink and the second by Vice Chair Tang. Chair Wang,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tang,
Yes.
Member Brodowski,
Yes.
Member Ayar,
Yes.
Member Souter,
Yes.
and Member Frink. Motion carries.
Right, we will now move on to agenda item 5.4. This item will be presented by Police Chief Mike Canfield and Assistant City Manager Audrey Moore.
I will take the start on this presentation that does not have a slideshow. Quite brief. It relates to 2 work plan items that were adopted by the PSAB at your June meeting that were then formally adopted by the City Council at its September 12th meeting. And those are to assess and make recommendations on youth substance abuse trends and prevention resources, and also to plan for and implement forums on the future of the community policing. The report that is in your packet provides background and summary of the scope of work to accomplish each of these items, and which includes basically research, some outreach, and the development of recommendations. Each of these items would benefit from the formation of committees that support the progress on the item. At this point, and this is also in response to a couple of the comments that came up under oral communications, we have 2 existing ad hoc committees. The terminology ad hoc committee is a recent switch made on the recommendation of our city clerk's office, as ad hoc committees aren't intended to be standing and existing forever. They exist to accomplish a certain objective, and when that objective is completed, their work is completed. And they tend to be also of a composition that is not of a majority of the full advisory board and therefore can act in a way that is not subject to the Brown Act. And that's another important feature of an ad hoc committee. We just stopped using the term subcommittee because the advisory board is not a committee, so it doesn't really need a subcommittee. It is its own advisory body, and therefore it can create committees. And the only two that we have in existence right now are the Alternative Mental Health Crisis Response Ad Hoc Committee, which consists of Chair Wang, Vice Chair Tang, and Member Ayar. And then the committee that just reported out to you on the prevention of bias and extremism in policing in the Mountain View Police Department, which consists of Vice Chair Tang, Member Frank, and Member Souter. So we already do have two subcommittees, one of which I think we would continue on at least until the next report out on the implementation timeline. Chief Canfield, I would suggest that you work internally to develop that implementation timeline and then circle back to the ad hoc committee for their input prior to bringing this back to the full PSAB, if that meets your approval.
It does.
Okay, in which case we don't yet sunset that ad hoc committee. It seems that there's some continued question and lack of clarity in the public as to whether or not there's an ongoing SRO committee, and there is not. That committee completed its work by developing recommendations about the SRO program, and now there is an annual report that comes to the full PSAB. So the full PSAB is the body that reviews and comments on the SRO program. There's no longer a committee that does that work. So that I thought was relevant background, not only to respond to the questions that came up during oral communication, but also as it indicates what kind of capacity the seven of you might have to take on new subcommittee work, as there are these two work plan items that we are asking for the appointment of subcommittees. A subcommittee does not have to be 3 people. It could be 1 person, it could be 2 people. And it just can't be more than 3 people, as that would constitute a quorum of the entire PSAB. So I'm not going to get into the different, the scope and the items that are in the memo that would be under each of these 2 work plan items. But if you have any questions about that, Chief Canfield could answer those questions, but the action before you now really is to first ask questions, if you have them, about the scope of those 2 work plan items. And then for individuals who are interested to serve on the ad hoc committees for each to put themselves forward and then be appointed.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions before I open this item to public comment?
I have a question. Could you repeat the names of the 2 subcommittees?
That we're looking to create?
Yeah.
There would be a subcommittee on the issue of youth substance abuse trends and prevention resources, and on the planning and implementation of forums on the future of community policing.
Planning
Ad hoc
and
committees or subcommittees?
They're ad hoc committees
planning and implementation.
on the forums on community policing. I made that more complicated than it needs to be. So ad hoc committee on forums on the future of community policing.
Future of, not on the past.
We're going to leave the past right where it is.
Any other board members have questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question about the youth substance abuse trends and prevention resources. How, the scope of prevention resources, is it just resources that involve the PD, or how broad can it go in terms of prevention resources? I'm trying to get a sense of that. In the case of mental health, we were working with Momentum for Health or Momentum Health, Momentum for. Right, so there was like another party involved in collaboration with PD kind of thing, right? So how does that work with substance abuse? To understand that a little bit further.
Chair Matt?
Yes, thank you.
So similarly to what has been discussed at Challenge Team, which is a youth a community-based organization gathering between school district members, police departments, other community-based organizations. Our school resource officers have presented at those topics and discussed some of the work that they have done, and it really does cross beyond the scope of just a police department. They've partnered with the Stanford University School of Medicine on their youth substance abuse programs at safe consumption, at more complex issues, and looking at the resources and the training that's available, and then providing that information. So for example, it's well over 100 pens were turned over to Stanford. Well, that's true. We gave them access to well over 100 big pens. I think they took 30 or so big pens for their research, both for the contents as well as the delivery methodology, but partnering outside of just the police department and traditional law enforcement services.
Do any other board members have questions? I think most of these are clarifying questions.
Can I continue? So the develop recommendations, with those recommendations, do you, they would be for the PD, maybe the SROs, like more you could do, but do you think the recommendations might extend to the folks that are working with PD as well? Or because we actually are making recommendations for Momentum Health in Mountain View.
So I believe the work of the PSAP would be related specifically to recommendations for the police department or internally within the city of Mountain View. However, it's my understanding that those recommendations could certainly be for the school resource officers or other members of staff, of the police department staff, to work outside of the traditional confines of the city or direct them to work with such and such group related to trending consumption or the work that they are doing.
It could go beyond.
Or recommending, I said directing.
All of us direct, some of us recommend.
If I might, I think there's something that's a bit different in the work that we do in partnership with Momentum for Health, because they really are, the designated alternative mental health crisis response program. And it is inherent in the way that they are doing the work that they do to connect with community groups like PSAB. We built our work plan really around supporting the effectiveness of that program. But even in making recommendations to them, we don't have the same sightline that we do to our own MVPD. Similarly, like we can't really make recommendations to the school boards or to other entities that aren't within the purview of the city. So I think the way that the chief answered that question gets to your intent, which is, to direct our staff to work with these other resources, recognizing that the reach and effectiveness of being able to raise awareness and have effective prevention is going to be heightened through those connections. If it was just limited to what our own SROs or officers could do, then the effectiveness would not be as great as what we could do in working with other partners. But that's different from making recommendations like, Jack, you need to do X, Y, Z,
Right.
or,
I think it would need to be within the sort of the partnership map of the PD, right? That maybe you could do more with Jack if that came up, right? For
Right.
example. So,
Right.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, would any member of the public like to provide comment on this item?
Yes. First, we have Bruce England.
Thank you. Bruce England again from MVCPRA, the last time tonight. Yeah, on the ad hoc committees, the ones that you're discussing now, of course, please establish formal names and use them ongoing as the reports come out, because one thing I did notice in the other reports we looked at for tonight is the committee names were fairly loosely referred to, and just having a standard practice of having a formal name established for each one and using it consistently. And I'll bring this up next time around, but on the website for your PSAB page, having all of those committees listed, including their spans of time they were active, if they're no longer active, would be very useful. Obviously, Audrey, as you pointed out, members of the public and MVCPRA members have been somewhat, I wouldn't say confused. We just don't know. We can't tell from the record what is the state of affairs or not. So yeah, I might bring that up next time, but that's what I wanted to say about your these new ad hoc committees. Thank you.
Are there other public comments?
We have Tim Kenzie.
Hi all, Tim McKenzie, he, him pronouns. I really appreciate the hearing ad hoc versus subcommittee and the logic behind them. We don't want zombie committees that are nominally existing and not actually doing anything. So being very clear about that makes good sense. And not having standing committee reports from dead committees makes sense. But I would posit and suggest as a member of the public that when these ad hoc committees are made, hopefully with formal names that can be referred to and put on the online, as was just said by the previous commenter, that these committees, like when they do exist, do have a standing agenda item of here's our update, here's where we are, even if the update is we haven't met since the last time that we've met, since the last time the full board got together. That could help us keep track, just as members of the public, of what are the committees that are still ongoing, which ones have been sunsetted. Makes good sense. We don't want a million committees. You guys only have so much capacity as people, and it would be imprudent to try to do too much. So getting rid of committees when they finish their charge makes good sense, but while they still exist, I would still really request and hope that we can get a standing agenda item for report backs from those committees, even if that report back is we haven't met since the last PSAB meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other? Thank you. All right. I will now bring this back to the PSAB for discussion. And I think this is the part where we decide who is going to be on the subcommittees. Do any board members have comments? Or discussions, or nominate yourself to be on the subcommittee?
I'd like to nominate myself to be on the future community policing forum.
Thank you. So I think I would like to nominate myself to be on the substance abuse trends and prevention resources subcommittee.
Also,
To be on which subcommittee?
the substance abuse.
Yes.
I'd like to volunteer for the community policing fund. And I'm interested in substance abuse, but I don't want to be able to if someone else is interested.
Any additional comments?
I nominate Member Langton for the future
Of
community policing. Yeah,
Can we do that?
We would need his concurrence.
that's fine. It could be contingent, but he has a body of experience that might lend itself to that effort. It's fine.
Let's see if he's interested.
We can check with them if interested, yes.
If not, I'm happy to go in instead.
If there are no additional comments, Assistant City Manager Ramberg, what do we kind of do from here?
So I heard two names for the Youth Substance Abuse and Prevention Resources, which were Member Brodowski and Chair Wang. And then I wasn't sure, Member IR, if you were wanting to be the third, if there wasn't another third, or if you were.
I'm interested, but I might be curious if Member Langton wants to be on a committee, which ones he wants to be on, and sort of defer to what his preference is. But if he doesn't want to do it, yeah, I'd like to, and do the forum one as well.
All right, so it may be that we need to have this, that we have right now, Deva and Kavita on the community, future of community policing, Joan and Jeanette on the youth substance abuse prevention resources, and that we have this on our agenda again next time to determine whether what Derek, Member Langton's interests are. And I don't think we need to wait to meet with, we can have the two who are on each meet if schedules coordinate before that time.
Our next meeting is in
December 14th.
Yeah. Deputy City Manager, or sorry, Assistant City Manager. The staff liaison for these committees are between who's on which committee?
It'll be someone from the chief's staff. Is it going to be you or?
Probably to be determined, likely Captain McGee and myself, but I would also like to make sure that I'm getting broader access to the department. And these are important to the safety advisory board. So potentially there are other staff members as well.
Sorry, can I ask a question about that? Are we as board members allowed to request maybe a certain person within the police department if we feel like they might be a good person for that?
Yes, based on, my preference would be that we have those conversations directly, outside, not Brown Act violations, but just one-on-one conversations. So I have an understanding of what your interest is.
Mhm.
It is, in some way a personnel decision, and I have to know if they have capacity, and I have to assess their aptitude as well. So I want to make sure that it's the right fit. So I don't want to discuss it publicly if that can be done. In case it wasn't the right fit or they didn't have capacity.
Of course.
Discuss it.
Great, I think that concludes item 5.4. And the last item is board staff comments, questions, and committee reports. So I think once these committees get started, if we want to give reports, this would be the time. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the PSAP at this time. Do any PSAP members or staff have comments or questions? Not about the moon.
Not about the moon?
Not about.
Oh,
What your questions?
there goes all my questions.
I want to, I like the idea about the subcommittee check-in in this section. I just want to recognize that the members of the public have been asking us about this for a while, and I'm wondering if we might as well just, it doesn't seem like a big deal to say, okay, here are 3 or 4 active subcommittees, or excuse me, ad hoc committees. Report, no report, we haven't met, whatever it is, like one line. If only not to keep hearing the public ask us to do it and feel like we're ignoring it. I don't think it's a big deal to do, and it seems like an easy thing to fulfill. So I'm gonna wonder if that's something that we could do. The second thing that I'm interested in the same way is the LCAC, the FLAC, any other public or community advisory committees, councils to the PD? If those get formed, what might be a good way to get up, if they meet quarterly, they meet monthly, whatever it is, to get updates anecdotally, not a PowerPoint, right? But anecdotally of, oh, we heard this, casual like, is there a way to bring that into this meeting? I really don't want any more PowerPoints, just like, hey, was at this meeting and did, right, real quick. And then my third thing is, if we're gonna open it up and get more details on sustained complaints on bias, I would like to propose that we get details on sustained complaints for, I know we can't take action, but I'd like to discuss sustained complaint details on anything else that's available to the public. That's it. Thank you.
Any other board or staff members have comments?
Just for the record, I really was interested in the committee for youth substance abuse trends and preventions. I'm just like at capacity in my life right now. And my prevention of youth substance abuse in my everyday life is taking over. So I just wasn't able to do it, but I just wanted to lend my support for that work. Also, if anyone was wondering in the public about the comments about the moon during bathroom break, I just asked if there was a correlation between the full moon and contact data, so.
And the PD confirmed there was, right?
That stands to be seen.
Did I misunderstand?
I was recommended to look at the manipulable RIPA data.
Where's Alex Brown to correct our pronunciation?
All right.
On the topic of updating the public about the ad hoc committees, I just want to point out that we should also be focusing on updating council as well, because I know that that was requested. So I don't know how we would do that, but I just want to make a point of that as well.
Was that requested by council?
It was requested by, I will let you, it's in my brain, I just can't say it right now.
Okay, send it to me.
Okay,
Ms. Ramirez? No,
come on,
come here.
thank you.
Almost. There's not even- Ellen, come here.
Ellen.
I was gonna say, if you have iPhone, you could airdrop it.
All right, we will now move on to the final item, unless there's anything else, but we will now move on to the final item of tonight's agenda, adjournment. This meeting is adjourned at 9:39 p.m.
I'll be right back.